Got a little more work to do back here. You can kind of see it's thicker here, thinner here, so I need to build that up and even it out. So I got this piece that goes in right here, and it'll just get glued in and then laminated over. That'll give us support for our shaft alley cover that's going to come across here. Now this back wall needs built up a little bit more yet in this area, and then I still have to build a new ring for our packing gland, our stuffing box to bolt to. So this is just an old one. We have a new one coming from Duramax. It's a very, very robust design compared to that, much better. Oh, we got this little pad made yesterday too. And so this is going to be for our old stuffing box. We just laid up a couple of pieces of laminate here. I think I used 2 layers of chop strand mat, 4 layers of 90, and then another layer of chop strand mat. Just put it on some plastic. I got one of my cutouts underneath just because it was flat. Put a piece of plastic on it after we laid it up and threw a weight on there just to hold it down, keep it flat. So let's see if this thing glued itself on here. You can laminate against plastic. Sometimes it'll give you a poor finish if it's wrinkly. Formica works really good if you polish it up. Put wax on it. Gave it a bit of a ripply texture, that's okay. I'm actually going to glue this up against some existing stuff, so that'll be fine. I'll just kind of help key it a little bit. So I'm going to punch a hole in the center of this, diameter of the male pilot on our stuffing box, our old stuffing box. Then I can set it in here. I'll mark the four holes, and then I've got silicone bronze bolts it'll go through. I'll just register it with a couple of nuts, and then I'll glass over the top of them. That's gonna lock those bolts in place right there, and then when we put the stuffing box back in, we'll just tighten the nuts on there. Shouldn't be too much risk of the bolts spinning out if there's fiberglass around them. Fibers, you know, it'll lock it in tight. So yeah, I got that done. Nice quick little laminate, just took a few minutes. So all kinds of things to do today. Lots of trimming in my feature, which is exciting. That looks like about 5 inches will do. And 5-inch hole saw, what do you know? Nothing too technical about any of this stuff, other than the placement of the bolts. And I'll probably enlarge the holes on this stuffing box before I mount it, because I'm going to need to have a little bit of wiggle room for it while we get it aligned for the shaft. There's still actually a shoulder in here from where it was originally, but a lot of it got broken out, and it's shallow enough now, it's skinny enough that there's too much wiggle room. Even if I slip this in here, it registers in the right spot, but there's wiggle room side to side, so that's really enough to throw it completely off, so I can't trust that. So I'm basically going to get the plate in place here, and then we'll just build it up and we'll level it off if we need to. What my plan is I'll trim this all up really good, and that's going to give my stuffing box a pretty approximate position. I'll go in here, I'll clean up all this old stuff. It's just Bondo in there. I'm going to bust all that out. I'm going to tie this in together and build it up real good. And then once our shaft is back in here, we can align the stuffing box on the shaft. We'll just wrap a shim around the shaft till we get a super tight fit on the inside of this. And we'll slide it into place, and then it essentially aligns that perfectly, and then we can lock it down with the nuts. First things first, let's get a hole through here. Okay, we'll get this marked out and cut. And we can get this positioned. So this is actually built up quite a bit now, just from the work that I did. As I'm working through this here, I'll actually be trimming this stuffing box back a little bit, and then I'll just building new layers back up into it to bring it out to this thickness. But this could be easily brought forward more. Can't really go back because there's a big block of concrete back there, but you could definitely bring it forward if one wanted to. So the first step is we'll get this trimmed and get it to fit in here fairly tightly, and then I'm going to figure out exactly how far out I'm going to bring it, and we'll trim that tube down a little bit. So I think my circle is going to be roughly 8.5, 8 3/4. So I'll go ahead and get this all marked out. So we'll go ahead and clean this up. I'm just going to use the cutting disc for it. Just rough cut this. Take a little bit of fiddling around. That might be a little bit big, so just going to kind of fit it in here. Not perfect, but it doesn't need to be. Yeah, let's check the fitness here. So I actually got quite a bit extra built down here, so I'm probably going to have to take a little bit off the bottom here. But where does that get us? So this backside is actually going to get built up still too, because I have to account for the thickness of the head of the bolt. I can probably position my stuffing box on here and mark the 4 bolt holes and drill them, and then just work on laying up the back. And when we get close, I'll just putty all the stuff in and glue it, and then it's going to get laminate over the top again. So it's just going to tie it all together. I think maybe I'll start by trimming this up to the original depth and see if the stuffing box fits a little bit tighter. Well, hopefully this is starting to make sense now, what I got going here. So this is all just like really roughed in. Like I say, these positioning and everything doesn't need to be perfect, because this is just going to get glued in here. But this is essentially what I'm getting at with this plate. So now I'll come back in here and I'll start building up the back side of this with fiberglass. That's going to lock these nuts in, or these bolts in place ahead of these bolts, prevent them from spinning when you tighten up the nut. This is the type of thing that you don't need to torque these down like really tight. All you're essentially doing is holding this packing gland in place and preventing it from spinning. We're not going to putty these in, we're going to bed this in with fiberglass, and so that'll make it good and strong. So once we get the back side of this built up, even with the head of these bolts, then we can come back in here and we'll get it positioned and we'll glue it in finally, and then we'll remove the shaft, we'll remove the stuffing box again, and then we'll come over the top of everything with more build. And in doing so, we'll get it all tied in to this shaft tube also. What I started out with this morning was just to make a very accurate plug on the back side here, and with a center hole. And then I have this thin twine right here, very thin twine, and I'll be able to use that to stretch a string line going forward again. So I will get this all positioned back up here, and we'll get the string line good and tight, and then I can use this to measure side to side, top to bottom on this bore right here, and get this as centered as good as that I possibly can, going off the old registration on the back of this. So this is registering right now in the stern tube where they bondoed this. You can see some of the markings, but a lot of it got broke out, so it's not as accurate as when we first removed this. But looking at the inside of the bore on the stuffing box, there isn't like excessive wear or anything. It looks pretty even, so that leads us to believe that that shaft was centered well in relation to the stuffing box. And so while I can get the very back of this, the pilot part of it, centered side to side and up and down, if it's just cocked over a little bit, it's going to be way off on this outside part. So it's important that I get that centered up, and that'll allow me to do that with a string line now. So we just kind of stick those in there. So yeah, so I know this back part is centered up and down because it's in the pilot. But what I need to do is ensure that this front part isn't cocked one way or another. And with the string line pulled tight going to the string off the reduction gear, I'll be able to measure each way and get it straight. So you can see that it only take a degree or two one way or another of being cocked for that thing to be off. So this is what I came up with. I just threw down a couple of layers of tape on this. This is going to allow this to break away from the putty that I'm about to put on that back wall, and also on this bore. And I'll put that in there. Once that sets, it'll leave an impression here, and then I can build up the surrounding area to get it flat. Right now I think one of these, the back side of this bolt is touching, the other ones aren't, so that's what I'm off, that I need to get it adjusted. So that's where that putty will come into play, is that once it sets up I can break this back out and I'll have a pretty accurate spot that it goes in. It's just kind of like making a mold. Once this is in and set, I can trim the rest of that shaft tube down flush with the face of this, and then we'll start bringing fabric in and also bring it into the tube. Once this plate's in place, then I know that everything is straight and we can do that. So I think I'm just going to put a big glob of putty on the back side of this tape here, because that's where I want it. So I'm just going to put a big old blob on these. And wherever it squeezes out,
it squeezes out.
If it touches the fiberglass, it shouldn't really hold it too much. Right now, okay. Like if it squeezes out against these.
There's a big gap in there, so I don't think that it'll do anything.
Yeah.
As far as if it does touch it, it'll just break right off
Yeah.
with a hammer.
This stuff is all just sacrificial. This will all get ground out later. All this Bondo will get ground out, and I'll clean that bore up really good in there. But this is strictly just to get this plate in here and get it squared up as best as possible right now. And I think that that's probably pretty good.
Yeah, getting it located is a big goal here, right?
Yeah.
So that you can glue your back plate with your bolts in and easily just locate your shaft packing.
Yeah, because once this plate is glued onto this bulkhead, then we take those 4 nuts off, and those 4 nuts are all the same, and so it should be pretty flat on this plate, therefore everything should still be the same when we slide it in all the way. That means we can get this all cleaned up, tie it in with fabric, and then we'll do the same thing. We'll just build up a layer of structural putty around this and make an impression of it, a mold of it. So when it slides in there, it's sliding in very tight, and then it should be able to break out again. The final one will probably maybe just a layer of tape. Tape works pretty good. It just gives you a little space there, but not too much. All right, let's see how this all goes down here. We got an extremely sketchy setup as usual. Got some line.
Got your predetermined spacers.
Not really, but kind of. All right. That's centered nicely right there, and that is probably about as good as we're going to get for right now. I think we just leave it alone. And then once this sets, we'll just take the die grinder if we need to just trim a little bit of glass off something, or just the back of this plate, and that'll get it cleaned up good. It'll be helpful having that bore tightened up now is the big part, but this kind of gets it in close, gets a lot of the slop out of it. This is temporary.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll basically do the same thing again for our final shaft stuffing box. And we'll have the next one is it's 8 bolts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's an 8 bolt. And so I'll make a ring with the 8 bolts bedded in it, and then there's just enough clearance for these 4 bolts on it. And we can drill those oversized, and that way we can position it. So we're gonna go ahead and pop this off here. I got this set in place last night. I just put some painter's tape on the back side of this so we could part it back off. Put some big gobs of putty underneath there. What we were trying to do is just kind of get it set
roughly in place, and then I can fine tune it a little bit. There's a lot of slop before, so now this will tighten it up pretty good and make the final alignment easier, I think. So the final alignment of this will all be done when the shaft is physically through there. We'll get some shim stock and wrap it on the shaft and slide this on there so it's good and tight. And then it's just a matter of putting this back in there and bedding it into some putty. And once it sets, then we can tighten up the bolts and it'll be nice and true. There she goes. Awesome. So you can see this tape did a really good job of just acting as a release. Like our putty is hardened up enough. Some extra that really bond to anything, so it filled it a little bit. This isn't super critical right here. The aim was just to get kind of some markers here. Now we know where we can come back in here and fill this without overfilling it. And then finally we'll just bed it all in putty, put it back in there, check the alignment again, just kind of block it up, brace it up, whatever we need to do to try and hold it in there square. We are just going to put a big old pile of putty in here, and whatever happens, happens. And we're not going to worry about it. Right, Matt? That's right. Put a little thin layer on that stuff. I built it up with some cloth in there, so I'm expecting a lot of this to bloof. Hopefully. I like that a lot, Matt. Get our little blocks in here.
What were the drill holes for in your piece?
Well, you know, I was going to use those to kind of like measure my depth in there.
Looks like they served as a good vent hole.
Yeah, also a good spot for that putty to adhere into, huh?
Yeah.
And there we have it.
Oh wow.
Got a little bit right there.
Not bad.
Starting to take shape now, huh?
Yeah.
So I'll fire up probably just the die grinder and get in here and clean up all this rough putty, all these hard edges like that, fabricates that stuff. Get it cleaned up, I'll come in here and fill the rest of this gap in, fill this gap down here. And then the final plan is just to come in here with probably like some, I don't know, 4-inch tabbing on each side. Get this laid in right here and tidied up. I'm just in the process of getting the stern tube cleaned up. I don't know if you guys can see in there, but you can see roving right there. So this junk right here is some stuff that they built up. Somebody built up at some point. This isn't from the manufacturer. We're taking out all this old Bondo that they used to locate the pilot on the packing gland. We'll get all that cleaned up. We'll get these corners radiused a little bit, and then we'll come back in here with cloth and wrap all this, going all the way back into here. And then we have a really good bond. So now we've bonded on the outside of the tube, and this is going to bond it to the inside of the tube.
Should never have a problem with any leaking or anything.
And see, it's just chipping out right there on the seam. So this is good to do. This tube is actually full of water right here. The shaft goes through it, it's full of water, and then the shaft packing gland right here holds the water out of the vessel. So a pretty important area.
So this is what we want to get to right here. This is roving. You can tell by the pattern of it. It had a resin layer on it before, or it could be from this, but they probably put a heavy resin layer on it either after they made it or during the process. Maybe this first layer goes in a little resin rich, I don't really know, but that helps keep the water from penetrating these fibers. So we need to remove this stuff right here. This is just a combination of, looks like maybe some 6-ounce cloth or something, and then some chopped strand on top of it. So we'll get this all cleaned out up here, get down to this roving all the way around. Be a little uncomfortable. I'll have to get down here and lay on my back and try and peer up in there with the light. And then we'll get all this crud mucked out of here. A lot of grease and stuff in there still from that we didn't clean out earlier. We'll get all that cleaned up good and then figure out how we're gonna get some good layers tied back into this again. This is really oversized right now, so I'm not concerned about clearances. It just needs to be the pilot of the backside right here. So I've got all that distance to work with right there. So I got lots of room, so that's kind of nice. This is 3 1/4, and this is it's like 3 3/4. So I got a heavy 1/4 inch on each side. Now our new packing gland will have a bigger pilot, but the ring that we use to put in here and locate the new one and hold it in place will have a bigger pilot for it. I think my plan is probably to put a bushing around this so it's sized properly for the new one right off the bat. So you can see that we're down in here into the roving now. That's the original parent material, so to speak. And we are going to get that cleaned up some more. We will start radiusing these edges and actually clean it off back in here. Oh, about, what is that, 4 inches, 4.5 inches. So we'll run a couple layers and stagger them in. And when we're done, we'll be all bonded up. Still got this stuff here to remove, but just kind of taking it slow, working my way in with a little cut. I can come in and grind it out. Burn tube is very important. This one is running through concrete to the back of the very back of the keel where the prop shaft exits the vessel. This is a fiberglass tube that is incorporated into the hull when they build it, or at some point before they put the shafting in it. So I'll probably have to do the same thing on the other side. It's a little weird looking, so I want to make sure it's cleaned up and it's 100% also. Like I say, this actually has water in it the whole time, and the shaft of course too. So might be wondering why water isn't gushing out of it right now. It's because we have an aluminum plate bolted to the back of the vessel where the shaft exited. We took off the housing for the cutlass bearing, and we're able just to mount a plate on there. When we get the vessel pulled, we'll take that plate off and we'll start getting our shaft all realigned and everything.